Ele lembra.
Okay, shalom everybody, and welcome back to lesson 2 in captivating cases in rabbinic responsa. So, of course, last week we started describing how in the genres of Jewish and Torah texts there is an entire genre called rabbinic responsa, and what that means is that there is so many rabbis throughout the generations that recorded their responsa. Responsa means the questions and the answers that they were asked. And they would record the questions that they were asked and the answer that they were given in primarily in areas of Jewish law. And we said last week that there's about 6,000 of these rabbis that recorded their questions and answers, making up over 600,000 of these questions and answers. Last week we looked at 5, and it covered all sorts of different areas such as, last week we covered primarily questions that were being asked from a very fragile place, Jews that were under a lot of pressure. But we focused kind of on the mind of the questioner. Where was the questioner holding in all of these questions? That's what we focused primarily on last week, trying to kind of climb into the mind of the person asking the question. And as a side note, we said that it gives us a fascinating entry into Jewish history, seeing that which the Jewish people were experiencing at different times in history. So today, we are going to kind of switch to the other side, and let's talk about the answers. So if last week we primarily spoke about the question, let's talk now this week about the answers. Let's focus on how the answers were given. So if you have the book in front of you, turn to page number 51. And I'm going to read you something. I know you're not going to have any idea at first what I'm talking about, but let's see what we can figure out. So we're going to talk about the Nile River. You know what they say, the Nile is not only a river in Egypt, right? So we're going to talk about the Nile River. Now, the Nile River, the way it was for thousands of years, people living in Egypt would experience a very interesting thing, is where every year the Nile River would have what they called an annual swell. The river would overflow with water. And as it would overflow with water, it would run into these canals and it would water the entire area around it. And this brought tremendous life force and lifeblood to Egypt and the surrounding area of the Nile, because it would make everything grow, and Egypt is short on rain. This actually is the way it was for many, many, many years, up until they built a dam in the 1970s. Following this, the annual swell, when the Nile River would overflow, they would make a holiday, a celebration out of it. And it was a big thing for the people living there. But the question is, what caused the river every year, the Nile River every year, to overflow? What was causing that to happen? And there were so many different answers given by different philosophers and different thinkers. So here we are on page 51, a man called the Radvaz, very famous Rabbi David Ibn Zimra, who was a very famous, noted halachic authority, Jewish law authority, from the year 1479 to 1573, originally from Spain, but had to run away from Spain because of the Spanish Inquisition, as we spoke about last week, and arrived in Israel. So he is addressing this issue. Again, I'm not expecting you to know why the rabbis cared about the Nile, but that's the whole hook of this class, of why they were interested in the things they were interested in. So page 51 in your book, it says as follows: is the Nile's annual swelling due to rainwater or underground springs? So that was the question that was asked. Why is the Nile River overflowing every year? Two options. Either somehow there's rain flowing into the Nile, or there's some underground spring which is opening and providing water. We have been inquiring about this in a casual way of honest non-Jewish traders who came from Ethiopia, because Ethiopia was the water supply feeding into the Nile. So he says that we would ask non-Jews in a very casual way. The reason, by the way, why he writes this concept of casual is because in Jewish law, if you ask somebody a question and they answer you in a casual way, meaning they did not know that you were trying to derive information from them, then their level of belief is raised. Because if I ask you a question and you know that I'm looking for information for a specific reason, you might be inclined to answer me in either one of the two directions. But if I ask you, and you answer me in a casual way, you don't know that I'm trying to figure out this information. It's just a casual conversation. So then the chance of you lying are much less. So it's an idea, which is that if you can gain information from somebody in a casual way, then you can rely on that information a little bit more. So he says, we asked these honest non-Jewish traders that were coming from Ethiopia. In other words, they're honest people. We have no reason not to believe them. And we wanted to know, hey, why do you have any information of this? So they don't know why we were looking for this information, as I just told you. So it's unlikely that they would be lying to us. And they told us that in southern Ethiopia, there are torrential rains for 3 or 4 months, so heavy that no one leaves their homes due to the downpours. These rains create large streams and lakes, which flow and empty into the Nile, causing it to rise and swell. Continues the Radvaz, I also inquired of non-Jewish scholars, and they all agreed that the Nile's rise is due to abundant rainfall. I further examined their books, and it is written in them that the cause is rain or melting snow. It is also written in their books that some of the early kings sent expeditions to explore this river and to determine its source. The explorers reported that the river originates from a mountain called Jabal al-Kamir, which means mountain of the moon, and that its swelling is due to heavy rains. So the Radvaz, who is a Torah scholar, spent his whole entire life in yeshiva, is not a scholar of marine ways. We have Mr. Jeff Rose with us here, who's an expert in water, right, in aquifers and in the source of waters. Maybe, but the Radvaz was not an expert in these kinds of things. And he was on this quest to find out from non-Jewish scholars, from traders that were traveling back and forth, and from history books, all about the reason why the Nile overflows. Now, I ask you, does anybody know why? Why would the Radvaz, the Rab David ibn Zimra, a rabbi leading a Jewish community, care to find out the source of the flowing and the swelling, the overflow and the swelling of the Nile River? If anybody has any ideas, just shout it out.
In case of drought, maybe you want to know if there was another way that it was filling up.
Okay. Case of drought. So you're suggesting for very practical reasons, you wanted to find out. You can kind of figure out how to deal with this. The answer is going to lie, it's going to connect to him being the authority on Jewish law. Somehow you're going to see soon that this connects back to Jewish law. So if you have any ideas, otherwise I promise you I'll give it to you before the end of tonight's class. But anyway, let's fast forward. Fast forward to the year 1763. There is a famous rabbi by the name of Yonasan Eibshitz. This is in your book on page 53. I know not everybody has books, so those who don't, you'll just have to listen. And Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz is reaching out to professors at the University of a place called, I believe it's pronounced Halle, somewhere in Germany. And he had a very bizarre question for these professors in college. So here's a rabbi reaching out to professors with a very strange question. Page 53, text 2, says as follows. I wrote through the veteran and exceptional scholar, Rabbi Henech of Halle. So Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz sends a letter to a colleague of his, Rabbi Henech, and he says, submit on my behalf the following question to the professors in the university where you live. Remember, this is 1763 in Germany. He says, here is the exact text of their response. And it teaches us how much caution is required when issuing halachic rulings. Remember, halacha means Jewish law. Having received 2 inquiries, so the professors wrote back as follows. We received from the Jewish people 2 inquiries. We do not know why you are asking us these questions, but we are physicians of this institution to investigate and provide answers based on the principles of medical science and anatomy. So the rabbis asked the professors, we want from you information about medical science and anatomy. We convened for a session, and after careful analysis and deliberation, we reached the following response, which we present below. So we got your question, we convened, and here's the answer. The first question that you, the rabbis, asked us was if any living creature can survive for some time after its heart has been removed. The Jewish people asked the professors in a university in Germany if a living creature can survive without a heart, for some time after its heart has been removed, whether due to illness or disease or something. Question number one. Question number two, if a bird, such as a chicken or a goose, is opened, so we kill it, we open it up, and there is no heart to be found, can we assume that another organ has developed in the place of the heart, performing its function and thereby sustaining the bird's life despite the absence of its heart? So the second question the rabbis asked the professors in the university in Germany was, we opened a chicken and there was no heart. Can we assume that this chicken had a heart, but another organ kind of surrounded it and another organ was operating in its place? Now, this also seems bizarre because rabbis are interested in how to put on tefillin, how to observe Shabbat, how to observe kosher. Why is Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz, this great, rabbi in the 1700s, sending a message to the great professors in a university in Germany, asking them for their professional opinion about a chicken without a heart? So far we have two bizarre scenarios. One rabbi in the 1500s was trying to figure out the source of the overflowing and the swelling of the Nile. Another rabbi in the 1700s was trying to figure out if you can have a chicken without a heart. Do I have you intrigued yet?
Pretty good.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dbaro. All right. Third story where the rabbis were on pursuit for something strange. This story takes us even further into history. It takes us into 1839, sometime between 1839 and 1894. A great rabbi by the name of Rabbi Naftali Chaim Horowitz. And he writes as follows. He said that we have a scenario where there is a kind of chicken, a new breed of chicken that was on the market, and it was being called Cypriot chicken. It literally means Cyprus chickens. But there's some lack of clarity if these were actually from Cyprus or not. But there's this new breed of chickens on the market called the Cypriot chickens. And this rabbi, Rabbi Naftali Chaim Horowitz, we're going to see now, is on a quest to figure out who and what are these chickens, and what the deal is with these Cypriot chickens. So he says, somebody had written to him, so he writes, regarding the Cypriot chicken, I wish to inform you that I purchased a specimen in the holy city of Jerusalem. I got hold of one of these chickens in Jerusalem, and another in Izmir. I was unable to purchase one in Cyprus itself because there are no Jews on the Greek islands, and the locals do not understand our language, so I couldn't purchase it. However, I saw that the captain, so he was on a ship and from Cyprus, and he saw that the captain of the ship brought these chickens onto the ship that sailed from Cyprus as provisions for the passengers. They were entirely identical to the chicken that I later on bought in Izmir, without the slightest difference in sound, appearance, or height. I offered the ship's captain 10 coins for one chicken, but he refused. The people from the Holy Land, that's Israel, who were traveling with me on that ship, advised me to buy one in Izmir, which he later did, which is a day's journey from Cyprus. It is widely known that the merchants transport many thousands of these chickens from Cyprus to Izmir, so I purchased a chicken in Izmir. These chickens are in the possession of my teacher and my grandfather-in-law, Rabbi Chaim of Tzanz, in Galicia. Galicia is like in Poland, somewhere near there. So here's a rabbi. He purchased a new kind of breed of chicken in Jerusalem and now is on a quest to find what is this chicken. He travels to Cyprus. He can't get hold of it. He can't even convince the captain of the ship to buy it. So he goes to Izmir and he gets this kind of chicken called the Cypriot. So the guy's all over the place, desperately trying to find this new kind of breed of chicken, of Cypriot chicken. So as you can see on our screen, the question is why? Why are the rabbis so interested in the source of the overflowing of the Nile, in if it's possible to have a heartless hen, and what is the nature of this breed of chicken called the Cypriot chicken? That is where we are headed in tonight's class. In other words, in all of these three cases, obviously the rabbis were asked a question. We'll see soon what the question was, but in one case, the question was asked of the rabbi, and in order to answer that question, he had to figure out the source of why the Nile is overflowing. Or in a different case, a question was asked of a rabbi, and in order to be able to answer that question, he has to figure out the anatomy of a chicken, if it's possible to have a chicken without a heart inside, or if the chicken can live a certain amount of time. And thirdly, a question was asked regarding this breed of chicken, of Cypriot chickens. And in order to answer the question, the rabbi had to do tremendous research in finding out what is this breed all about. So just to repeat what I said in the beginning of today's class, the last week we focused on the questioner. This week we want to focus on the answer. So let's try going to the mind of the rabbi who's answering the question. The first thing you have to know about a rabbi who's answering the question is that there's a strong belief that when a rabbi is asked a real question in Jewish law, Hashem, God, is going to assist him in answering that question. That is a very important part of this discussion. There is something that we are going to call siyata dishmaya. That is Aramaic for the word heaven's help. And that means that every time a rabbi is asked a real question, not just a theoretical question, but a real question about Jewish law, Hashem is going to assist him in answering this question. This idea we find by King David. You can take a look in your book on page 59. It says by King David that he was a skilled musician, he was a mighty warrior, he was a man of battle, he was intelligent, he was handsome, and it says, and God was with him. And the Talmud tells us that what does it mean God was with him? That King David had a special knack for answering questions in Jewish law. When a question was asked to the rabbis, to the scholars, to the judges, King David had a more precise, better way of answering questions, and it was attributed to the fact that God was with him. As a result of he had God's help, he was better at answering questions. And this is the concept, as we mentioned, called siyata dishmaya. And it's a very important piece of this puzzle, and there's many, many stories told. Very famous story about a rabbi called Rabbi Landau, who was interviewing for a job to be a city of a rabbi, and to kind of test him and see if he was going to be a good rabbi, the people brought him a question. And he answered the question, he got the answer wrong. And the people told him, look, you're wrong. And they showed him why he's wrong. And he said, if I got the answer wrong, it must mean that this question wasn't a real question, it was just a theoretical question. And they said, you're right, we set you up. And they were so impressed that he was able to know that they gave him the job. But when it is a genuine question, that there's a question in front of us, that the law has to be decided, we believe strongly that Hashem is assisting the person who is kind of giving the answer. And this is one of the reasons why, people always turned to the rabbis to get the answers, because when a rabbi is doing his job properly and he's a worthy person, he's a person of integrity, he's a person of God-fearing, and he's doing his best, Hashem will work through him. So that's point number one. Point number two is that so that's first thing. First thing is the rabbi, we know, and the rabbi has to know that he's going to be assisted and guided by Hashem, and therefore needs to prepare himself in such a way to be a worthy conduit of God's assistance. But then there's also a very important second piece to it, which is beyond the books. Let's call it this. Second, he has to be an expert in the Jewish books. But third step, which we want to focus on tonight, is he has to understand the reality that is existing in front of him. What do I mean by that? If somebody's asking a question about a rabbi about an animal, the rabbi has to know how the animal works. If somebody's going to ask a question to a rabbi and say, Rabbi, can we use a microphone on Shabbos? It's not only that the rabbi has to understand the laws of Shabbos, he also has to understand how electricity works. And that's a very important and fascinating point, because you see a lot of times people will say, Torah, Judaism and science don't get along. They're two different things. Not only are they not two different things, I just gave you 3 examples where rabbis were reaching out to local or non-local scientists, doctors, experts, to understand the physical, in Hebrew we say the physical metziut, the physical reality that's exists in front of them. If you are to rule on a halachic issue, you have to understand what it is that you're talking about. And the Talmud tells us that one of the greatest sages of the Talmud, this is on page 61, his name was Rav. Rav said that he went to be an apprentice by a shepherd for 18 months. For a year and a half, he went to live with the shepherd. This is like one of the chief rabbis of the Jewish people who went to live on a farm. I don't know if he slept there, but he apprenticed on a farm by a shepherd because he wanted to understand blemishes. What does blemishes mean? Meaning there is an entire section of law of when an animal has a blemish, what is the nature of this blemish? And it could apply in a few different scenarios. For example, in temple times, certain blemishes made the animal invalid to be brought as a sacrifice. Certain blemishes did not. Or, for example, still nowadays, when we slaughter an animal and we're going to eat it, there are certain blemishes that consider that render the animal not kosher to be eaten. There are certain blemishes which render an animal fine. You could still eat it. So you can be the greatest expert in Jewish law. You've studied every book, and in the book it says if the blemish is like this, it's good. And if the blemish is like that, it's no good. But if you don't understand the animal that's in front of you, then how are you going to make that decision? So Rav, the great sage from the Talmud, said, listen, I did all of the reading of the books, but now I have to go and study the animal. I have to translate that information, that knowledge, and actually see what does a blemish look like? What does a blemish look like in the heart? What does a blemish look like in the lungs? What does a blemish look over here? And look inside the animal, outside the animals, and so on. So this is what we're talking about tonight, the investigation that the rabbis have to do to understand the physical reality of what's in front of them. We're calling this beyond the books. You can be the greatest expert in the books, but if you don't understand, you don't know, you don't have the information of what's happening in front of you, you don't understand the science, you don't understand the medicine, you don't understand the anatomy, the electricity, the engineering, whatever it is, you're not going to be able to answer the question properly. Let's do a quick check-in. How are we all doing?
Good.
Good.
Anybody want to share any thoughts of what we've shared up until now?
I'm intrigued.
Okay.
I see where one chicken might have something to do with the other chicken in the story.
Right, we have 2 different chickens. Yeah, probably going to be about the laws of kosher. So before we get back to our 3 stories that we started with, here's a very interesting story or very interesting case that will help you understand what I'm talking about. So in the 1950s, there was an Israeli-owned ship company. Does anybody remember it or know what it was called? So there was an Israeli ship company in the 1950s called Zim, Z-I-M. I think some of it might still exist today. And at that time, obviously, most people traveling to Israel did so by ocean liner. That's how you went by ship. And if I'm anyway going from America or from Europe or from somewhere to Israel, and I have to take a ship, I may as well take an Israeli-owned ship. Very young country in its infancy, and here you have a national brand, a national company. So give it the business that it deserves. Now, the challenge with this is that if you were traveling from America to Israel, the trip took more than a week. What's the problem if it takes more than a week? The problem is that you are going to travel over Shabbat. What's the big deal? became a whole discussion of can you or can you not travel on this Israeli-owned ship over Shabbat. Why? Because in general, the way it works is that if you are on a long trip, for example, you're on a cruise, and your boat is traveling over Shabbat, it is not a problem. You just may not get on or get off on Shabbat. So go back hundreds of years. People used to travel by ship. That you're allowed to be on the ship over Shabbat, but you're not allowed to get on and off. That is if the ship is owned by non-Jews and is being operated by non-Jews. But for example, in the old days, when you have to actually put coal inside a fire to get that ship working, for certain, a Jew is not allowed to do that work. A Jew is not allowed to add coal to a fire on Shabbat to drive the boat. So if the boat is owned and being operated by non-Jews, then you, a Jewish traveler, may be on that ship over Shabbos, as long as you do not get on and get off. However, when the ship is owned by a Jewish company and it is being operated by Jewish sailors or Jewish workers on the ship, it becomes a whole different level of question. And then the question became, was it a violation of Shabbat to travel on the ship or not? One option would be that the ship should dock. In other words, you travel Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, should dock on Friday in places like Bermuda or other places, be there for the 24 hours, 25 hours of Shabbat, and then continue on Sunday. Other people did not like this solution, and therefore this question was addressed to the rabbis, and many rabbis, or some rabbis, I should say, gave the ruling that it's not a problem. The way the ship operates and functions is not a problem, and you're allowed to operate it on Shabbos. The Rebbe, as in the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, did not like this answer. Now, just for you to understand, the Rebbe himself would not usually get involved in questions of Jewish law. He was a spiritual director, a soul doctor of sorts, dealing with personal and issues of inspiration and those kinds of things. But he wasn't usually involved in questions of Jewish law, ruling if things are good or no good. However, in this case, the Rebbe wrote multiple letters, and it's fascinating that in these letters, the Rebbe said that he is uniquely qualified to answer these questions because the Rebbe actually went to school. The Rebbe was in university, and in university, the Rebbe studied electrical engineering, specifically the way it relates to ships. So the Rebbe's primary area of contention with the other rabbis was not their interpretation of Jewish law, but it was their understanding of how the ships worked. I'm going to repeat that. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's contention, his reason why he disagreed with the other rabbis, all great rabbis and very respectable people, he said, I don't disagree with your understanding of Jewish law. I disagree with your understanding of how the ship works. And the Rebbe pointed out to them that they are passing judgment, they are passing ruling without properly researching the operations of the ship. And it's a fascinating idea because the Rebbe said, listen, your interpretation of law is not the problem. The way you studied the Talmud, the way you studied the Mishnah, the way you studied the Torah, that's all fine. But you don't understand how the ship works. You don't understand what happens to the water when they flush the toilet. You don't understand where the electricity comes from. You don't understand these things in the ship. Therefore, you're missing. Take a look in text 6. So it's a very interesting thing. The argument between the rabbis wasn't so much, it was. Of course, the argument lands up being about the law. Can you or can you not operate the ship on Shabbat? But the point of argument is not about what it says in the Talmud. The point of argument is their disagreement on how the ship works. So take a look, text 6, page 62. The mitzvah of Shabbat observance that you write about is one of the most fundamental ones. And as the rabbis state in the Talmud, that the Shabbat equals in importance to all other mitzvahs combined. So the Rebbe starts in his classic style that this is a weighted issue. It's important. I mention this particularly in reference to your inquiry regarding the Shabbat desecration, which is perpetrated by the Jewish ocean liners. So there you see the Rebbe immediately says it is a desecration of Shabbat. That was the Rebbe's opinion. The claim that everything is done automatically during the 24 hours of Shabbat is absurd. And I state it with the fullest authority, being an engineer myself and having studied marine mechanics. So this is what I mentioned to you before. I called it electrical engineering. The Rebbe said in between the years 1933 and 1937, the Rebbe was enrolled in a very prominent school in Paris, where he received a diploma in mechanical and electric engineering, which a whole discussion for a different time, but that was very unique for somebody of the Rebbe's position, family, caliber, and so on and so forth. It was very uncommon for, rabbis of that caliber and stature to go spend time, let alone a few years, and get a degree. Either way, so the Rebbe says, the claim that the other rabbis are making is that everything is being done automatically. The Rebbe said is absurd. And I'm not just speaking from, pulling things from my thumb, says the Rebbe. I know this because I studied this. This is what I did for a few years. And the Rebbe continued, for one thing, certain machinery cannot be operated automatically, especially those connected with steering, radio communications, services, and similar ones. Secondly, even those machines which can operate automatically are required by their very operation, as well as by international law, to be checked periodically every few hours, which involves direct Shabbos desecration a corresponding number of times during 24-hour periods. So the Rebbe says, first of all, some things cannot be automatic because automation would be the solution. That for 24 hours, none of the sailors have to do anything. Number one, there's certain things that can. Number two is even the things that could have to be checked. Thirdly, the Rebbe says, certain so-called automatic machines, including some of the boilers, requires a change of parts periodically, approximately every 6 hours, when the affected sections of these machines are stopped and restarted for the said purpose. So 3 reasons the Rebbe says it's impossible your claim that everything is automated for 24 hours. Continues the Rebbe, the water which is supplied for drinking and even water in the cabins is derived from the seawater by a process of distillation, which as you doubt know, means the boiling and evaporation of the water and converting it back to distilled water by cooling. The water supply is not stored for days ahead, and not even for 24 hours because of the storage space it would require, but is produced continually by process of distillation. So he said, forget about the driving of the ship. The water that you're going to drink, its system is distillation of seawater, which requires the usage of electricity or whatever it was that they were using, and it had to be done on Shabbos. Now, here's the point that we want to say. Only one who has no conception of how such machines are operated can be made to believe the absurd claim that an ocean liner can, for 24 hours, be operated automatically without any Shabbos desecration. So the Rebbe says the only way you can make such a claim, talking to the other rabbis, is if you don't understand the mechanics of a ship. Unfortunately, there have been rabbis who have been misled. So the Rebbe is kind of finding some merit to these rabbis, because most probably what happened, the people that operated or owned these ships presented their findings to the rabbis. But sometimes presentings are found, a little bit in a biased way, where the people that presented the information gave the information the way they wanted to be presented, so the rabbis would give them the ruling that they wanted. So the Rebbe said, listen, most probably the rabbis have been misled and have misled others on this subject. In their ignorance of the technical aspects involved and under the influence of misleading statements by technicians who, for reasons of their own, did not choose to disclose all the facts, these rabbis have regretfully been misled into thinking or even declaring openly that no Shabbos desecration here was involved. So, again, it's a whole fascinating discussion, but the Rebbe says we are not arguing about the laws of Shabbat, but these rabbis have been misled in their understanding of the mechanics of a ship. Now, if somebody asks you, can or I cannot operate this ship or be on the ship on Shabbos, you need 2 areas of expertise. Number 1, the laws of Shabbos. Number 2, how the ship works. So this, of course, is anytime the rabbis were asked a question, they had to go and say, okay, what question was being asked to me? Okay, I hear the question, but now I need to understand what is it that you're asking a question from. questions or comments about this topic?
I have one question.
Yes.
So then what happened with the immigrants when they would come over here?
If the boat is owned and operated by non-Jews, it's not a problem. The only issue is because this company was Zim and it was owned and operated by Jewish people.
Okay. So the immigrants would not have known, though, the boat that they got on, whether it was owned and operated by Jewish people, would they?
Yeah. In other words, if you lived 300-400 years ago and you were traveling from place to place, if the boat was to be traveling over Shabbos, it had to be a boat which was owned and operated by non-Jews. Here in the 1950s, you kind of entered a larger question because this company Zim it was an Israeli-owned company. They were operating multiple ships, so it was like really one of the first times where you had this issue where there's this huge company operating multiple ships, and their route from America to Israel was more than 7 days. So this question hadn't really been addressed on a large scale because going back to, Jews in Europe or in other places before, it wasn't Jewish-owned companies that were operating, these ships. So even still today, if you get on a cruise and the cruise is a 10-day cruise, you have no problem. If some giant company, owned and operated by a non-Jewish company, you have no problem. If a Jewish guy, buys out one of these cruise companies and it's being operated by Jewish people, then you have a problem being on Shabbos. But to the best of my knowledge, the only time this question came up was with these Zim boats.
Okay.
Does anybody have the
We
time?
know about that Zionist was not religious people, so this boat can be operated by Jewish people, but if they're secular, is it still a problem?
Yeah,
I was going to ask.
That's interesting, right? In other words, so not everybody was asking the question to the rabbi. Some people said, I'm a secular Jew, I don't care about Shabbos observance. But the Jews that did want to observe Shabbos were asking this question. So the rabbis had no sway, to your point, or technically they had no, right? They couldn't tell Zim what to do, what not to do. But if somebody who wanted to be Shabbos observant said, I want to go from America to Israel and I want to go on the Zim boat, they would turn to the rabbis and say, as a Shabbos observant person. But if I want to be Shabbos observant, the fact that the owners and the operators of the boat are not religious makes no difference. A Jew is not allowed to break Shabbos for me. This still applies today. I am not allowed to have a Jew desecrate Shabbos for me, whether or not that person is Shabbos observant or not.
Mm-hmm.
So if I need somebody to turn on the light or to cook me food, I can't go to a Jew who doesn't observe Shabbos and say, do it for me, because I am then not allowed to benefit from a Jew desecrating Shabbos on my behalf.
Could Zim have had a second set of operators for Shabbos?
There's two problems over here. There's the owning and then there's the operating.
Right.
But they could go maybe further and say bring in a non-Jewish partner and then some non-Jewish operators. That would probably be okay, because having a business run on Shabbos in many cases is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know if Zim themselves were too concerned about what the rabbis had to say. I think it was more groups of people that were trying to travel using the ship that wanted to be Shabbat observant.
Yeah.
Does anybody have the time?
8:20.
8:20. Perfect. All right. So with all of this in mind, this was just kind of setting the stage for us of understanding that. Why is my hand raised? This is all understanding the importance, and it's really a very important concept to understand, is that the Torah, you have to take a step back. The Torah, what's the point of the Torah? The point of the Torah is how to live our life in the world, how to live as a functioning human being. So how to travel, how to eat. So if you want to know how to travel as a Jew, you have to know, okay, is this a good way of traveling or is this not? Is this a Torah approved way of traveling or is this not a Torah approved way of traveling? If you want to know, is this kosher? So you have to know, is this a Torah approved food or this is not, so on and so forth. So many of these different questions required not only expertise in Jewish law, but also required expertise on the ground in the item that was in front of you as well. So let's go to the very first question which we asked tonight. Tonight we began this class by introducing the Radvaz, Reb David Ibn Zimra's question that he was asked about the nature of the overflowing Nile. So what does this have to do with anything? So I know not all of you have this, but if you look on page 64, you will see a map of Cairo in the 16th century. And you will see towards the top right of the corner, there was an area called the Jewish Quarter. So in the 1600s, in the 16th century, there was quite a few Jewish communities in Cairo. And they had what was called the Maimonides synagogue. And if you look at the top right over there, it says Khan el Khalil Bazar. So we're looking in that area. And then you can see that there's this kind of waterway called the Khalij al-Misri. What does all of this have to do with anything? So as those of you that don't have a book can now see on the screen that there was this thing called the Khalij, which was a canal off the Nile. So it directly connected to the Nile. And every summer, it got filled with water for the reason that we explained before. The Nile would overflow in the summer, and it would fill up these canals, and it would run into this beautiful canal that ran very close to the Jewish community, one of the Jewish communities in Cairo. And the question came up, is this good to use for a mikveh or not? So this is why now, right? Why was the rabbi trying to figure out the source of water? Because the question came to him that there's this beautiful, nice canal of fresh, clean water running in the summer right next to the community. And many women were eager to immerse in its waters to observe the mitzvah of family purity, taharat hamishpacha, which is a bedrock of Jewish family life. So I'm assuming everybody's familiar with mikveh. But in very short, a woman once a month will immerse in water to bring purity for her and for her family and so on. So the question was, can this water be used for a woman to immerse in the water? Now, what makes a mikveh kosher and what doesn't is too large of a conversation to have entirely right here, right now. But we're just going to talk a little bit about it, or just enough to understand what we're studying today. There's basically two different kinds of mikveh water, of two kinds of waters that make a water good to purify a person. In Hebrew, one is called a ma'ayan and one is called a mikveh. Here you can see it up in the screen. And this is what we have. So in other words, like this, if I go to my bath right now and I fill up a bath full of water, that is not a kosher mikveh. It doesn't. You do not reach purity just by going in that kind of water. Or if you go outside and you fill up you take a hose, that doesn't work. There's two possibilities. One in Hebrew is called a ma'ayan. Ma'ayan means a spring. So any natural spring is good. So if it's spring on land fed by underground aquifer, so if it's a natural spring, that it would be kosher, that would be good. A person can then dip inside. By the way, the word kosher over here has nothing to do with food. Kosher means like fit. The word kosher in Hebrew means fit. So if it's fit for immersion, you have two options. A flowing, so natural spring, and those natural springs, the water is moving. There's movement in that water. But that's not that's good. That's fit for immersion because it's being fed by an underground aquifer. Then there's another one, which is the actual word mikveh. You can see this on page 65 in your books. The word mikveh means like a collection. That's what the word mikveh means. And the way we do it, which is how most mikvehs are today, is that there is accumulated rainwater, and Once it becomes accumulated, the Torah says that it can't be flowing at that point. It can't be moving. Okay? So there's two possibilities two kinds of water you can go. And one is that it's being fed by an underground aquifer and it's flowing. The other one is that we bring rainwater into a place, but it has to be stationary. So now you can understand what their question was. We're here in Cairo. There's this beautiful, fresh Khalij, or however you pronounce it, canal, which runs right next to our city, on the outskirts of our city. But the water is definitely moving. So think about it like this. If it's, and we know that the source of the water of this Khalij canal is from the Nile, because the Nile would swell every summer and flow into these canals. So if the reason why the Nile overflows is because it's being fed somehow by some underground natural water, there's some phenomena that's taking place under the ground, and that's pushing the water up, then this canal, which has rushing water or slow moving water, is kosher for a mikveh, because the source of it is coming from the Nile, and the source of the extra water of the Nile is from some sort of underground thing. But if the source of the overflowing Nile is rainwater, then in order for rainwater to be a kosher fit mikveh, the water has to be stationary. And this Khalij canal is not stationary. So they came to Reb David ibn Zimra, the Radvaz, and they said, listen, can we use this mikveh? It's a great mikveh. Every summer, the Nile swells, the Nile overflows. It runs into this canal system. We have one right out here outside at the outskirts of our city. We'll create the infrastructure for it. It's moving water, so it's clean and it's fresh. And we want to go use it as a mikveh. So the Radvaz, in order to answer this question, went on this whole journey. He started interviewing, if you remember in the beginning of this class, he started interviewing people that were coming from Ethiopia, and he started reading the books, right? Here's a rabbi who spends his time all day studying and praying and wearing tefillin and doing all of these things, now studying ancient Egyptian books. And everybody's like, dude, what are you doing? Why are you reading ancient Egyptian books? He's like, no, I need to understand the source of why the Nile overflows every summer. And I'm doing proper research. Why? Why do you care? I care because the people of my community, or the people that are asking me if it's good for a mikvah or not. In order to know that, I have to know, is it coming from an underground source, in which case it's good, or is it rainwater, in which case it's bad. So go, please, to page 66. I know I skipped one source, but for the sake of time. Text 8 on page 66. Now he answered their question. He wrote back. He said, you asked me, so I'll inform you of my opinion. You asked me, is it permissible to immerse in the Khalij, a place that has no water through the year, but when the Nile rises, the water enters there and flows intensely? The question is whether it has the status of a mikveh, rainwater gathering, in which case the movement invalidates it, or does it have the status of a ma'ayan, a spring, in which case the fact that it's moving is not a problem. Teshuvah, answer. Generally, rivers swell due to the surface runoff from rain or melting snow. And it is said that this is also the case with the Nile. Its swelling is fed by the rains in Ethiopia. So he says, I did research, and I'm confident to say that the swelling of the Nile is because of rain. Somehow through Ethiopia, it's feeding into the Nile. And therefore, it is clear to me that you cannot immerse in the Khalij, because a mikveh, which means gathered rainwater, only purifies while it is still, not moving. Now, okay, so his answer is no good. But here comes the beauty of the rabbi's question, of the rabbi's answer. He says, but I have a solution for you. Right? Don't give up so fast. However, there's a way to make it work. What is that? What you should do is bring in barriers into the water. So take a section of the water and block it off. We've established that it's rainwater, which is okay. It's good to immerse yourself in rainwater as long as it's not moving. So bring in barriers and place the barriers in the water, rendering the water between the barriers gathered and still. So you corner off some water and make the water still, in which case it makes it fit for immersion. So he says, listen, you asked me a question. The technical answer to your question is no. You cannot go into the mikveh, into the kalish, because based on my research, the source of this of the overflowing of the Nile is rainwater. But don't give up so fast, don't worry, because if we can stop it from moving, it will be fine. So it's really fascinating, both of these areas, where number one, he did all of this research, again, not looking in Jewish books. I don't know how long it took him, but researching this natural phenomena, which multiple people had researched before him as well, giving a conclusive ruling about it, and then saying, but if you seal off a section, creating a stationary area, then you can go in there. So here it is up on the screen. He says the kalish was determined to be rainwater. It was disqualified for immersion while flowing. Sealing off a section created a stationary kosher area for immersion. Beautiful. Let us talk about the chicken without a heart. Why were the rabbis interested? If you remember earlier on, we learned that the great famous Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz, living in 1700s, wrote to his friend Rabbi Henoch in Germany, and he said, I asked the professors of the university there 2 questions. Number one, can an animal live? Right? Remember the question? Can an animal live a little bit after, for a short amount of time, without a heart? First question was, if any living creature can survive for some time after its heart has been removed. Second question is, can you have a situation where you opened up the chicken or the goose and you don't find the heart inside? Can we assume that another organ kind of grew over it and took its place? Why are we talking about this? Because, see, in the old days, maybe some of you remember your grandparents describing this to you. If your parents wanted to serve chicken for dinner, there was multiple steps to how this worked. Nowadays, we go to the kosher Tom Thumb, sometimes Trader Joe's, and you buy a chicken. You can buy all sorts of different kinds of chickens. This chicken has probably been produced for you out of state, far away. It's been through the fridge and the freezer and all sorts of different things. But in the olden days, it's not how it worked. What did you do? What did your grandparents have to do? First, you'd go to the market and you'd buy a chicken. Then where would you take the chicken to? You would take the chicken down the road to the shochet. The shochet is the ritual slaughterer who would ritually slaughter it according to Jewish law. Then you would bring the chicken home. Now it's a dead chicken home. And everybody in the house would pluck all the feathers, and they would rinse it and salt it, and rinse it again after you salted it, according to Jewish law, and everything, and then you would eat the chicken. What happened? The year was 1709, and the following story made headlines, social media buzz. Everybody in the town was talking about the following story. Right? So this takes place in Hamburg, Germany, 1709. A young girl, I'm reading on page 68, opened a slaughtered hen to remove its innards. So I don't know, give me a good German Jewish name.
Goldstein.
Goldstein is German?
Kurtz.
Kurtz.
Turtz?
Kurtz.
Oh.
With a K.
The Turtz Goldstein family bought a chicken, gave it to the shoichet, brought it home, and the mother says to one of the girls in the family, open it up, clean it out inside. We're gonna make it for a special dish. The girl opens up the chicken to take out its innards, and she was standing at the edge of the table. It's a very important part of the story. And there was a cat near her cat, because the cat was waiting that whatever, some disgusting parts of the inside of the chicken that the people wouldn't eat, so she would throw it to the cat. So whatever she wouldn't eat, she would toss to the ground. She opened up the chicken, and she's cleaning out the insides, and she doesn't see the heart. I never found the heart. There was no heart in the hen. Now, her mother, like a good Jewish mother, said, "What do you mean there's no heart? Never heard of such a thing." Well, what happened? You dropped the heart on the floor. The cat ate the heart, so you can't find it anyway because it's in the cat's belly. But the girl insisted, "No, I'm not an idiot. I only gave her the spleen, and that's it. There was no heart inside the chicken." This is the town news that young Miriam Kurtz from 39 Van Stachel Street, whatever, has a hen with no heart, and her mother is insistent that the cat ate the heart. Right now, the hen was a fat. I'm reading for you. This is not I'm not making up a story. I'm reading from the book. It's on page 68. The hen was fat and healthy and good, and there didn't seem to be anything else wrong with it inside. But there was no visible trace of a heart that had decayed or got destroyed or something. Furthermore, when the hen was alive, it appeared strong and healthy. But the girl claimed that she could not find its heart. So the case was brought before the students, the great Torah students of the time, and they said, "Listen, no heart, the chicken's not kosher." Why? Before we figure out if there was or was not a heart, let's just establish that there's a concept called a treifa. You could see it up over here on the board. Now, you've heard of the word treif, which is how we refer to non-kosher. If something's not kosher, we say it's treif. But the technical word treifa is used in the Torah, which means mauled. It means, right, if an animal was mortally injured by a predator, even if the animal is still alive, the Torah disqualifies it, even if you were to slaughter it properly. So if I owned a sheep, let's say, and one day I see a wolf attacked my sheep, and the sheep is going to die within a few hours because the wolf attacked it. So I say, "Listen, it's going to die anyway. Let me bring in the kosher slaughterer, quickly slaughter it before it's dead. So the slaughtering is what we will kill it, and then I can eat it." The answer is no. If the animal is not viable, so to say, on its own, it's an injured animal. It's an animal which is either one of its vital organs have been destroyed, punctured. Something about this animal is not good. This animal is not kosher. By the way, this is a whole fascinating discussion, because when they slaughter cows and sheep and these kinds of things, many times the cows and the sheep are not kosher, because you have to check the insides of the animal, and that's what galat is. You ever heard of galat kosher? Galat is a certain way of checking the insides of the animal to ensure that none of the insides of the animal have any of these blemishes. So the rule is, an animal that we for sure know that one of its vital organs has been destroyed, which means that the animal would not live more than a certain amount of time, the animal is not kosher. So to the amateur Torah scholar, so to say, a girl walked in and said, "Listen, I opened up a chicken, it had no heart." The rule is, then you can't eat it. Because let's say, for example, she says, "I opened up the chicken and I found that the heart was all busted up." It was the heart was. You can tell that this animal would not have lived a long time because the heart was in bad shape. It would not be kosher. So technically, if a chicken had no heart, it's not a kosher chicken. The only problem with the story is can that even be possible? Is it possible? I just want to make sure we understand the point over here, right? If theoretically there was actually no heart in the chicken, then the animal is not kosher. But the only question is that even a possibility, or are we to assume that the girl threw the chicken on the floor and the cat ate it, because you cannot be a chicken without a heart? But if theoretically you could have a chicken without a heart, then the fact that it would be missing its heart would make it not kosher. In simple English, if you open up an animal and you see that its insides are all busted up, the liver and the lungs and all of those things are in bad shape, the animal is not kosher. So this girl came to the yeshiva students. She said, hey, listen, I couldn't find a heart in my chicken. So they said, well, if the chicken doesn't have a heart, it's not kosher. But the question obviously made its way up to the higher ups in Jewish law, and everybody started kind of getting involved, because it's a very fascinating question. Because can we rely on the assumption that there obviously was a heart and the girl just missed it? Because how can you be a chicken without a heart? And then people started asking that question. Well, can that physically exist? Can you have a possibility of a chicken without a heart? So eventually the question came to Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz, who was the greatest of the great of his time in the 1700s. And that's why he wrote to the scholars, the professors in university in Halle, and he said, listen, is it possible that you open up a chicken and maybe like the heart had kind of been covered over by one of the other limbs? One of the other limbs grew around the heart and was kind of functioning of a heart. So the girl's right. I didn't see a heart because it's been covered by something else. So take a look on page 69. So the first question is, can a living creature survive without a heart? If the answer is no, then obviously this chicken had a heart. It's just she can't find it anywhere. So in order for them to establish what the law was in Jewish law, they needed to know a physics. Now, the rabbis, as much Talmud as they studied, didn't necessarily have the answer to this question because they're not veterinarians. So on page 69, exercise 2.1, right, you can see over here as follows. They kind of count out the thing. Is it possible for a living creature to survive without a heart? So if the professors would have answered yes, then Rabbi Eibschitz will assume that what occurred in this case was, again, if a chicken could live without a heart, then it's possible that when the girl opened the chicken, there was no heart because it could live without a heart. Maybe its heart fell out a day or two before, in which case this animal is what we call a treifa. Its insides are busted up. It's not regular, and therefore the chicken would not be kosher. If the professors would answer that no, a chicken cannot survive without a heart at all, that obviously means that there was a heart in there when she opened it and she threw it on the floor. Does anybody need clarity on what's happening here, or are we clear as to where we're holding? So in their reply, the professors wrote back and they said, absolutely not. It's impossible for a living creature to survive without a heart. That doesn't exist. It's not like the heart fell out yesterday or it puked it. It's impossible. You cannot have a chicken without a heart. So therefore, that leaves us with one probability. When the girl said, I couldn't find a heart, you can't find it. I don't know, you threw it out by accident, but it's impossible that you didn't find a heart in there. Now, they took the rabbi said, okay, but 1 second, maybe, okay, I agree. Everything needs a heart, but can another organ take over the function of the heart? And to that, they said, yes, it is possible. It's possible that some other organ can kind of, grow around the heart, taking over the functioning of the heart. And in which case, it would be possible for a heartless hen to continue to survive, in which case the animal is called a treifa because it's not a healthy animal. So the professors they had two things in their answer. Again, number one, they said every living creature requires a heart, but it is possible that another organ can take over the functioning of the heart. So at the end of the day, he ruled about this chicken that since the girl, who's the one that opened it, is insistent that she did not see a heart, we have to rely on her words. If you can bring me two other people that were standing there and say, listen, she says she doesn't see a heart, but we saw you throw away the heart, then we can rely on them. But as long as we don't have two other people to say we for sure saw a heart, even though it's a very small probability that another organ took over the function of the heart, because it's possible, and the girl who opened the heart the chicken is insistent that she didn't see the heart, so we're going to take her word for it, and we're going to say, sorry, this chicken is not kosher because it is considered a treifa, which means it is considered to be a animal which its insides are busted up, and therefore is not considered a kosher animal. Now, what's fascinating is that what you're looking at here on the screen is that it was discovered a few years ago that in the University of Halle, or Halle, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, it's a city in Germany, they actually have a faint echo of this question from Rabbi Yonason Eibschitz. As you can see over here on the screen, this is a ledger from centuries ago documenting various questions submitted to the professors. And there's an entry which reads as follows. I'll read it to you. The entry that you see over here reads as follows. It was January 8th, 1763. A responsum to two questions from the Jewish community concerning the circumstances of Jewish kosher slaughter has been issued. While we cannot say with absolute... that's what they wrote. So nobody can give... You understand what they're trying to do is they're matching up. We have Rabbi Yonason Eibschitz, his writing. And now we find this. Can you be 1,000% certain that what Rabbi Yonason Eibschitz is writing about is what this is referring to? Technically not. But the years match up, the situation matches up, and together it makes this fascinating piece where it's being recorded in Rabbi Yonason Eibschitz's book and in 2 lines in this ledger from the University of Halle, just discovered a few years ago. They wrote, again, a responsum to 2 questions from the Jewish community regarding the circumstance of Jewish kosher slaughter has been issued. So they just kept ledger. We issued a response to the Jewish community, and that's it. So here again, we have this fascinating idea where in order to give ruling as to Jewish law, the rabbis had to do serious research as to the physical reality of how chickens operate, and if you could have a chicken without a heart, so on and so forth. Any questions or comments? Does anybody have the time?
8:45.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we get to our third question. The third question was that there was a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Naftali Chaim Horowitz, who was on a trek, on a mission to find out about chickens called the Cypriot chickens. He picked them up in Jerusalem, and he went to Cyprus to find them, but he couldn't, so he went to Izmir, and he finally got one, and he gave them to his father-in-law, his grandfather-in-law, Rabbi Chaim of Tzanz. A whole story. Why was he so interested in the Cypriot chickens? So here's the story. In general, how do we know which birds are kosher and which birds are not kosher? What is the answer?
Generally, it's birds that are not birds of prey or
Yes,
scavengers.
those are signs. But if you go back to the Torah, what signs do the Torah give? Like for animals, the Torah says if an animal has a split hoof and chew the cud, or fish, the Torah says fins and scales. So what are the signs of a kosher bird? The answer is the Torah does not give signs. The Torah gives you a list of 24 non-kosher species with the implication that if it's not on that list, it's kosher. It's a very backward way of doing something. Instead of telling me what I'm allowed, you tell me what I'm not allowed, implying that everything else you are allowed. So the Torah lists 24 non-kosher species and everything else you are allowed. Now, what happened? The Jews in Israel, as a result of trade and advancements in technology, they started moving different kinds of breeds of chickens from place to place. And a new breed of chicken got introduced to Europe, which we were calling the Cypriot chicken, originated in Cyprus. It was a little bit larger than a typical European chicken, had a little bit of a different sound. It mostly looked like a chicken. So now the question is this bird kosher or not? So again, here's a bird of chicken, a breed of chicken, but we haven't really seen it. So is it kosher or not? So I want to know is it kosher. So I look inside the Torah and I see here's a list of 24 chickens which are not kosher. The problem is that the list that the Torah gives, it's sometimes hard to identify every single thing on that list. So it's possible that the bird in front of me actually is on that list because I don't know exactly what everything on that list is. So text 10, page 70, very important. The law in when it comes to kosher birds, you have to have what is called Masorah. Masorah means tradition. It's not enough to say the bird in front of me is not on the Torah's list. So I go to a new country and I discover a new kind of bird. So I say, okay, I looked in the Torah. This kind of bird is not on the list of 24 forbidden birds. I'm eating it. No, that's not good enough. There has to be tradition that this bird is kosher. So page 70 from the Code of Jewish Law, one should not eat any bird unless there is a received tradition that it is kosher. This is the established practice and one should not deviate from it. So if you come across a new breed, it's not good enough. You have to know. It has to be tradition. What have people been doing back? Now, with the arrival of the new chicken breeds in Europe, a question arose. Is this new breed of chicken kosher or not? Now, you want to ask me what the tradition is? There is no tradition. We've never seen this kind of chicken we've never seen this kind of bird in Europe. So we don't know. Together with that, to say that these chickens were not kosher would have been a major issue because already in Europe at that time, a lot of the chicken farmers were breeding this new kind of breed with the local old kind of breed. And they had been mixed into most of the breeds. So if this Cypriot chicken is not good, it's going to invalidate most of the chickens because most of the chickens have already anyway been inbred with this. So that leaves us with a story that we have in hand over here, which is the rabbi doing tremendous research, trying to figure out, what is the deal with this. Now, one obvious approach was to say, listen, I know it's a new breed of chicken, but still chicken. So just say it's a chicken. We know chicken is kosher. There is tradition that all chicken is kosher. So let this be part of all chicken. Sounds logical and fine, but not all of the rabbis were comfortable with this idea. And they said, it's a chicken, but it's a different kind of breed. Maybe the Torah doesn't allow this breed. Maybe we don't have tradition. So this man, Rabbi Naftali Chaim Horowitz, who we spoke about, he living in Jerusalem at the time, his grandfather-in-law, who was, as we mentioned earlier on in Galicia, sent him a message and it says, listen, I want you to investigate if there is some community in the Middle East that has been eating these chickens for a long time, because that will give us tradition. So go and find out if we can find in Cyprus and somewhere a community that has been eating these chickens for hundreds of years. We can say, oh, found a Jewish community that's been eating these. So ultimately, his search brought him to a place called Izmir, where is the city that was importing the chickens from Cyprus. And he said, I went to Izmir and I bought a chicken, and the chicken in Izmir was the exact same chicken that everybody was asking the question about. And now he went to the people in Izmir. Izmir had a Jewish community, and he said, hey, do you guys eat these Cypriot chickens? And they said, yes, we, the Jewish community of Izmir, have been eating this kind of chicken for a long time. We have no problem with it. So he said, great. This chicken that I found in Izmir matches perfectly to the chicken that I have back at home that my grandfather-in-law is asking me about. And he brought that chicken back to his grandfather-in-law in Galicia. And he said, look, I went to Izmir. In Izmir, they've been eating this chicken for a long time. Does it match up to the new breed of chicken which is making its way to Galicia, Poland? He said, yes, looks the same, sounds the same, all everything. And he was able to establish that the Cypriot chicken has what we call a valid tradition to it. So the question was, a new breed of chicken arises, is there a reliable tradition? And the answer was, I went to Izmir. I found an ancient Jewish community in Izmir. They've been eating these chickens for a long time. And he was confident and comfortable to come back to his father-in-law and to the community and say, I did the research, I did the time, and we are good to go with these chickens. Again, bringing out the point that everybody knew what it said in the books, but what about the facts on the ground? And here you have the third instance of today of a fascinating journey into understanding the facts on the ground, where he was able to establish that these chickens were indeed kosher.
Wouldn't the question of interbreeding raise an issue, a halakhic issue about kosher?
Not if they're both chickens.
Okay. Even though
if they're both considered chickens, then
so they're not different
they have
species.
no problem. Sorry?
They're not different species. They're both
If they're both chickens,
chickens,